Today, we become legends.
So the title of this video is a little bit misleading. Obviously, more content being added to the game is always better, assuming that quality can still be a good standard. But hey, it probably got some of you watching right now to click when you wouldn't have clicked if it was my other title, Should Smite 2 Move to a 4-Week Patch Cycle, which is the main subject of this video. This has been a topic brought up a lot in the community recently, and most prominently by Weekend in his recent State of Smite video. This was just one issue brought up by him, and I highly do recommend checking out his video if you haven't already. I think he makes some great points in that video that I completely agree with and some that I don't, but it's definitely worth a watch. One of the major points he brought up though was the 2-week patch cycle and how he personally feels like the game is mature enough now to go back to a 4-week patch cycle like we have for most of Smite 1. He claims that we had it for all of Smite 1, and I don't know if he just misspoke or doesn't remember, but there was quite a long time in the early days of Smite 1 where we were not on a strict 4-week patch cycle. Back in those days, they just kind of dropped updates when they were ready. Sometimes it was 2 weeks, sometimes 3, and very occasionally 4 weeks between patches, usually around the holidays or whatever. It was only around the start of season 2-ish that we actually began a regular 4-week update schedule, and even then it was a bit sporadic. It's hard to pinpoint exactly when this strict 4-week cycle started happening because the patch notes list on the wiki isn't accessible right now, but from looking at God release dates, it was around season 2 when most patches started to be 4 weeks apart. Keep in mind we were getting a God with every update back then in Smite 1 like we are with Smite 2 right now. It was only later in Smite 1's life that we started getting a God release every other update. All this to say that no, Smite 1 hasn't always been on a strict 4-week patch cycle, and it's not the only way to do things. Smite 1 had a pretty long period that spanned the entire alpha and beta, as well as some of the early seasons of the game, and was updating more frequently than every 4 weeks. The whole idea of shipping a patch every 2 weeks in Smite 2's case is that the game really needed content as fast as possible in the early days, and Weekend's argument, which I do somewhat agree with, is that the game is now mature and complete enough that we don't need a major update every 2 weeks to, quote, fix the game. I largely agree that the game is definitely out of that dire straits time period that we had in the alpha days and early beta phases. Replayability is way up, progression systems are mostly in place, though a few are still missing. Core systems like God Builder and all the game modes they want to add soon are in. Yes, I know Slash is missing, but the team have stated they're not considering Slash anytime soon, so all the other modes from Smite 1 are in. The game is absolutely in a way better state than it was when they initiated this hastened development style, and the question now is, do we still need to do this? What are the benefits and drawbacks of a 4-week patch cycle versus the current 2-week one? We'll start off with what a 4-week cycle could bring to the table, as that's more interesting to discuss the benefits of something we could have rather than the benefits we currently have from a 2-week cycle. The first one is the most obvious, and that's more hype for each update. Even if the pace of development doesn't change at all, every update to the game will have double the content. Let's take a look at some of the recent update blocks and combine them to give an idea of the size of patch we could expect every 4 weeks. If OB19 and 20 were one patch, there would be Xbalanque and Osiris, both with aspects, the Loki aspect rework, the new match lobby, the Curio system, the Wandering Path and Free Shop, 4 new Traveler markets, 2 new cross-gen skins, Slaughterhouse Chark, a new Saga Vault, the new Rip Talent item, plus some other small things and the balance changes for the patch. If OB17 and 18 were one patch, there would be Jormungandr and Tsukuyomi, both with aspects, 4 new Traveler markets, a new event, the Reaping, new supporter store name colors, conquest changes to shift starts, the side jungles and firebrands, alongside some other things and the balance changes for the patch. That's just 2 examples, and obviously the latest 2 updates have been substantially bigger than the 2 before them, so you could expect maybe a middle ground between these 2 in terms of how much content would be in a 4-week update schedule. There's no doubt that this will create more hype and probably get at least some people to come back and check out the game, where they might not have done for a patch half this size. Though I do think a good portion of the people who quit or are on hiatus from the game are waiting for something bigger than this to come back. A major update like a new conquest map or the full launch of the game would of course have a larger impact on getting people to come back, but I've discussed that in a previous video recently, so I won't go over it again. Another benefit that could come from a 4-week patch cycle is that the game becomes more digestible, especially for casual players. For me, it's my job to cover the updates for this game. I play at an absolute ton and I play at a pretty high level, so personally I quite enjoy there being meta shifts to figure out and new stuff to try every 2 weeks. It keeps the game fresh and I like learning about those kind of things, but I feel like for the more casual audience, things changing this quickly could put them off the game. Having to potentially figure figure out or look up a new build every 2 weeks, or follow all the god balance changes every 2 weeks, or keep up to date on a new system that launched every 2 weeks. That could get pretty exhausting, I would imagine. You can make the argument that very casual players don't and shouldn't care about the meta, and I think that's valid for the most casual players out there. Little Timmy playing 2 games of Arena on the weekend and only playing Death probably doesn't know or care that Apollo lost 10 base damage on his 1 or Rip Talon was nerfed. However, I think there's a good segment of the community that is sort of soft casual, where they do follow the game and do care at least a little bit about playing what's good and knowing the updates, but they're not hardcore enough to want the game to be constantly shifting. That middle ground audience is who I think would benefit a lot from a move to a 4-week patch cycle. The ultra casuals don't know or care, and the ultra sweats actively want constant change to the game to keep them on their toes, but that middle segment could benefit from this. Another smaller thing that a 4-week patch cycle could bring is more polish to each patch. This isn't a guarantee though. As a famous band once said, nothing in this world is free, and polish, bug testing, and QA do take time. Yes, they would have twice the amount of time to polish a patch, but that patch has twice as much content to polish, so in theory, the benefits here might be small, unless they slightly lessen the amount of overall content coming to the game to make room for polishing work. If instead of 2 times the content every 4 weeks, it was 1.9 times the content, and the rest of the time was spent on QA, then this could be a benefit. But that does come at the cost of slightly slowing down the development of the game. Those are the 3 main benefits that could be had from moving to a 4-week cycle in my opinion, but before we talk about some of the drawbacks and my conclusion on all of this, there's one thing that is sort of neutral and has arguments on both sides, that being content creation for the game. As a creator myself, I can speak on this, and I think there's some benefits to a 2-week cycle, such as constantly having updates to cover, which gives me a more regular flow of content that I can rely on to be there alongside my other videos like this one. But there's also the flip side of that in terms of getting potentially more traction per video. Stuff like the meta updates, like a top 3 gods for every role or item tier list video, would have more time where they're relevant and thus pick up more views total across their lifespan. Update reviews would be the same. There's less of them, but each one would probably get more traction. So really, I think there's upsides and downsides of the 2-week patch cycle from a content creation perspective, and it's hard to predict what will be better overall. Generally, a 2-week cycle is more consistently decent performing videos, but a 4-week cycle could have fewer but better performing videos. A bit of a wash overall, but let's move on to some downsides of a 4-week patch cycle. The first major one is that, of course, the game could stagnate for a while in between patches. As a community, we've sort of come to expect new stuff to play with every 2 weeks, and it's definitely possible that players will get bored with no new content for a whole month. We might see more players initially on every update drop, but could reach lower lows towards the end of those 4 weeks, as people drop the game due to staleness and wait for the next update. Obviously, this still happens on a 2-week cycle to a certain extent as well, but it will be more pronounced on a 4-week cycle, and could be a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy in a way. People quit after 2 to 3 weeks due to the game being stale, which makes match quality worse, which makes more people quit, and so on until the patch drops. There could come to be an expectation that you just don't play in the final week of a patch cycle because you'll get terrible matches, stuff like that. Again, this already happens, but will be more extreme on a 4-week patch cycle. The next downside is also pretty obvious, being that people have to wait longer for content that is being artificially held back for up to 2 weeks. People who might return to the game when ESET gets added will return 2 weeks sooner on the current pace than if they had to wait 4 weeks to get ESET and Sylvanas at the same time. This new objective loop feature that they had planned for Conquest is something that the game desperately needs right now, and having to wait an extra 2 weeks for that when it could have been dropped sooner just to be an arbitrary 4-week patch cycle would be a noticeable downside. So there's benefits and drawbacks of moving to a 4-week cycle in my opinion. Let's move on to my conclusions and personal thoughts on all of this. After giving it some thought, I do think moving to a 4-week patch cycle would be good for the game right now. I think the benefits probably outweigh the downsides, and that only gets more true the more the game matures. What I think they should do is start planning to move to a 4-week patch cycle now and implement it in January, maybe alongside a bigger than normal update that can set the stage for what we can expect from future monthly patches. I imagine they probably have the rest of the year's updates planned out fairly well, so moving to a 4-week cycle right now could mess with things. But if they plan ahead for this change in January, they can start planning content with the knowledge of an update every 4 weeks, rather than changing things right now and essentially Frankensteining their remaining patches for the year into larger updates. Also, keep in mind that they could still do hotfix balance or even a full-on bug bonus balance patch like they did in Smite 1 that happens 2 weeks into the cycle. A 4-week update schedule is mainly for the new content and updates to the game. Balance changes could remain agile when needed, and if they really felt like they needed to drop a certain feature early, they could release it mid-patch and just tank the hit of a smaller update next patch. Overall, this will create more hype moments and beats for players to return to the game, make the game more digestible for soft casual players, and potentially come with more polish and less bugs, at the cost of delaying features that the game might need as soon as possible and potentially stagnating the game towards the end of the patch cycle. But what are your thoughts? I found this topic pretty interesting when I actually dove deep into what it would mean for the game, which is why I thought I'd create a dedicated video, and I'd be interested to hear if you personally would like to return to a 4-week cycle or not. Don't forget to subscribe and drop a like if you enjoy these types of videos, and I'll catch you guys for another one later on. Have a great day, and peace out, you nerds.